Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Oncea, editor for Business Solutions Magazine, and I'm pleased to serve as moderator for today's webinar, 5 Cyber Threat Trends MSPs Need to Know. But real quick, a little background. Last year, for the first time ever, we witnessed a minor year-over-year decrease in the volume of malware. In part, the decline can be attributed to the increased security awareness, but it also reflects changes in cyber criminals' tactics. We observed a drastic increase in malicious website encounters and significant changes to the malicious IP landscape, as well as an overall decrease in the average lifespan of phishing sites. These observations are evidence of a highly reactive threat landscape that adapts at a moment's notice to changes in the ways that users try to protect themselves. The Webroot 2017 Annual Threat Report found rising threats today include ransomware, exploit kits with ransomware, malicious Android apps, and high-risk URLs, among other things. Reports such as this one are more than likely the reason you've chosen to join us today as we look at the collection of threat intelligence and its importance in combating cyber threats, which threats are likely to be seriously problematic and dangerous through 2017, what you need to know about the threat landscape, and the resources and tools you can turn to in order to protect yourself and your clients. So joining me today is Tyler Moffitt, who's the Senior Threat Research Analyst for Webroot and one of the contributors to the Webroot Threat Report I mentioned above. Tyler is a key member of the threat research team and spends much of his time gathering samples from the wild to test and improve Webroot's capabilities to handle the latest malware threats. Real quick, before I turn things over to Tyler, though, I have a few housekeeping items to address. First, we'll be leaving some time at the end of today's webinar for a live Q&A. So you can submit your questions at any time during this presentation. There's a Q&A module in the upper right-hand corner on your webinar interface. And if you ask a question that for some reason we can't get to, we will reply to those post-event via email. The one question that we commonly receive that I can answer for you right now is can I view this webinar again? And the answer to that is yes. Once we're done, an email will be sent to you that will detail that process, and then you can view that or pass it along to people that you think will find this information relevant. So with all that out of the way, I am more than pleased to turn things over to Tyler.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it, and thank you, everybody else, for joining this webinar. We're going to go over the 2017 threat report as well as some trends at the end. Once again, I do appreciate you guys joining, and like John said, if you have any questions or anything you think of while I'm talking or presenting, go ahead and type them in so you make sure you get your question in. And at the end, I will go ahead and set aside some time to answer all those questions. I will also have my email up there in case maybe we run out of time or I don't answer your questions. I'm more than happy to answer them online through email as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So we can see here that moving here to, there we go. Okay. The 2016 was yet again, another record year for cybercrime. While we did technically see a decrease in malicious executable files, we saw more malicious IPs, websites, mobile apps than the previous year. And, to begin, it's important to understand the source of the Webroot threat intelligence. So all data in this presentation is derived from the Webroot Threat Intelligence Platform and represents real infection data directly from our customers and the networks and devices that we protect. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So the big data processing used in this platform, coupled with massive scale of Webroot's machine learning and powerful contextual analysis engine, enables the Webroot Threat Intelligence Platform to classify and rescore, over 27 billion different URLs on over 600 million different domains. Little fun fact, too, we actually reclassify and rescore all 4.2 billion IPv4 addresses and all in-use IPv6 addresses every 5 minutes, And we have over 13 billion file behavior records that are really useful in helping us determine the million or so new executable files that we see each and every day. And we also have on the mobile side over 50 million mobile apps in our database, which is seeing huge exponential growth, which I will go into and talk to you guys more fluently. And we have over 40 million connected sensors that is essentially the source of this data. All this data that we get is derived directly from our customers, and those 40 million sensors, there's a constant feedback loop, if you will. So let's move on to some stats on executable files, okay? So in 2016, approximately 1 in every 40 new executable files was malware, right? And during 2016, approximately 94% of those malware, they were only ever seen on one PC, which really underscores and, really understates the how prevalent polymorphism is. And we actually found that in 2016, Webroot classified 56% of these never-before-seen executable files. We identified them as malicious within the first hour. And you scale that to the 4 hours, and we caught over 90% of them. So Webroot is able to accomplish this in part because of its record of digital fingerprints. Every executable file encountered by Webroot Secure Anywhere combined with automated systems that use those fingerprints and hashes to create new detection rules to stop similar files in real time. Even though attackers continue to innovate and use low-volume attacks to avoid detection, change their IP address, stuff like that, we're innovating more quickly to stop them breaching systems and data. So, some information on URL and IP threat intelligence. We found that 33 million unique malicious addresses were categorized in 2016, and that's actually an increase from 2015. This indicates the trend seen in previous years that attackers are changing their IP addresses constantly to avoid or delay detection of their malicious activity. And, the time needed to identify malicious activity and provide the updated blacklist to customers varies by vendor, but Webroot, constantly identifies new malicious activity and updates its blacklist, enabling, almost immediate detection of activity from new malicious IP addresses. And some of the things we found, though, is that in analyzing our blacklist, which at any given time ranges between 8 and 12 million URLs or IPs that we have blacklisted, right? We found 88% of them made the blacklist only once, right? And of the 12%, to reiterate there, 88%, what that means is a lot of these sites are good for the longest amount of time, and then they're used only once, usually for like 4 or 5 hours, not even just a few hours, right? And then they're back to good. They go offline forever. So, it's really difficult, especially for static blacklists, to keep up. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, what about the other 12%? The 12% that appear more than one time in the blacklist. We actually took a look at the top 10,000 of these, top 12% to find out, that they were actually added and removed from the blacklist over 10,000 times apiece. And so what we found of these top 10,000 bad IPs is, that let's take a look at an actual geo breakdown of them as far as where they're located, right? And we can see United States, still top dog. We're currently holding 22% share, okay? But this is a sharp decrease from 2015. 2015, we had over 41% share. And to be honest, we really should. You have to realize, a little backstory, 55% of all registered IP addresses are hosted in the United States, okay? So it makes sense for us to have the largest share. It really does. And as you can see here, this sharp drop, of almost half, if you will, it really does indicate that we're seeing an increase from foreign countries, and that is definitely the case. We're seeing a little drop from China, definitely a drop from Germany, United Kingdom, stuff like that. But as far as increase, Vietnam and India have seen a sharp increase. Vietnam didn't even have 0.5% last year, but they have over 9% market share now of all malicious IPs, and India also with a huge growth as well. And so what we're seeing here is the distribution of URL risk categories, and we can see here that 16% of them are high risk, only 15% are trustworthy, and 52% are moderate risk, right? And let's take a look, geo breakdown of that as well, okay? And we can see that the top 10 countries that host the most high-risk URLs. So United States, still 43%. And that's probably never going to change. The United States is always going to be number one. And some of the reasons for that, right? Because these countries here, they remain fairly consistent year over year. And it's due in part to attackers in parts of the world, even if malware is being created by Chinese people, Russian people, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, right? Even if they're creating it there, they're always hosting it in the United States, okay? And the reason why they do that is to avoid, automatic blocking by geo-filtering services. Because some of these companies that operate only in the United States, the United Kingdom, that are, maybe small, medium businesses that don't really do any business necessarily worldwide, or with countries like Russia and China, right? They do countries that are English-speaking countries and don't really worry about Russia and China. A lot of them will basically just blanket blacklist and say, listen, there's no reason why we should be connecting to Russian or Chinese servers, so let's just go ahead and blanket block those. And so these malware hosters, they don't want to be defeated just by blanket blacklisting. So they make sure to host their malware on United States servers, so it's not immediately just taken care of by that. So it's important to consider both IP address and URL reputations when making security decisions. So take a look at the high-risk URL types for the top 10 countries. And, this graph shows another way to look at that, high-risk URL data. And, it consists of malware, phishing, spam, proxy avoidance and anonymizers, and botnets, right? And this is the exact representation of those countries in the previous graph. And some interesting things is typically the biggest share of high-risk URL categories is mostly malware, right? Most countries, like their share of high-risk malware is mostly malware, but some have the exceptions. So one of which is Australia. Australia, over 65% of Australia's high-risk URLs are for phishing, and that's almost double the share of the second highest country in the top 10. And I'm not going to lie, too, we see lots of phishing email for Australia. And part of my suspicion as to why this is phishing sites really aren't active for that long, and I'll get into it more later, and they're getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Like it used to be they'd have active for weeks, then a day, then half a day. In fact, we're finding now the average is 15 hours. But some of these phishing sites, they're really only active until a specified number of credentials have been gathered. Let's say they're programmed to only catch 50,000 people, right? But they're programmed to go off at when a day starts. These are all programmed to start at a certain time. Well, Australia and New Zealand, they hit that time zone. They hit the new day first. So my suspicion is that they're going to get a huge influx of some of those phishing campaigns that only catch a certain amount of people. Well, it happens to all be, Australian people, and then it turns off, and we don't even see it live when we wake up. And so that's some ideas there. Some interesting stuff we're seeing as well is that 75% of Germany's high-risk URLs are all associated with proxies or anonymizers. And that's more than twice the relative share of any other country in the top 10 as well. And we found that, that basically it's just Germany and Australia that don't have malware as their top portion of high-risk URLs. So the three countries in the top 10 with the highest relative percentage of malware, like payload files, are China, Ukraine, and Hong Kong. And so phishing attack license size, I did talk a little bit about this earlier, but there's a dangerous trend in phishing over the years, and so this is a sample set of about 1,000. We found that none of them lasted 2 days. In fact, over 84% were less than a day, and the average was less than 15 hours. Some of these were only active for 15 minutes, and so I suspect that those were the ones where they just basically are only active until a set number of people are compromised, and then they just shut off. Because that for them would be the most secure. And, you have to realize that you need Webroot, Bright Cloud real-time anti-phishing service to automatically determine in milliseconds, if a page is being requested or is part of a phishing site. Because this trend really shows that these static blacklists that are updated once a day or even twice a day, they really can't keep up. I mean, these phishing sites on average are, like I said, less than 15 hours. So you have to realize, too, like years ago, at one time, the average phishing attack lifecycle was measured in weeks or months. I mean, it wasn't just like 2012. It was common for each phishing campaign to use their own domain, new domain, new server that they created, right, dedicated to that campaign, right? And today, phishing attacks don't do that anymore, hardly at all. In fact, what we find that they're doing is they actually will find a good domain, a benign domain, and then what they'll do is they'll compromise one little page in that domain, right? So technically it has a complete domain, URL, and they'll replace that one page within that domain with phishing content. And we found that actually in 2016, 100% of phishing URLs were pointing to malicious like phishing sites, but were within benign domains. That's something you definitely got to watch out. Other tactics we've seen is that to evade detection is that they're using JavaScript to prevent leaving a page and also using plain text to avoid HTML analysis, okay? And so we actually found that throughout 2016, the average user had a 92% chance of being presented with a zero-day phishing website. And we found that of those people that were presented, 60% actually fell for it and inputted their credentials. So definitely something to watch out for. So now we're going to look at phishing impersonated companies. And this graph indicates that there were over twice as many unique zero-day phishing URLs impersonating technology companies than financial institutions. So a lot of people used to think, and that was the case previously, financial institutions were like primary suspect, main target for phishing, when really it's actually your main email hub now. They're no longer going after Wells Fargo, PayPal, Chase, or whatever, right? And there's some reasons for that. One is people are becoming more and more educated. They are becoming more and more aware that people are out there to steal their financial information, and so they are more skeptical as far as when they log into their, bank information or their bank site. They're being a little more scrutinous, checking the URLs, making sure they're on the right domain, making sure the website looks right, stuff like that. But anyway, it actually makes more sense as far as a return on investment to go after these tech company hubs, and I'll explain why. So let's say you were to compromise somebody's Gmail or somebody's Yahoo, right? You have an email and you have a password. And since you have that email, the actual account, you can see basically anything, all their online activity, where they're shopping, what accounts they're using, what sites they have accounts on, stuff like that. And so you can essentially, if you wanted to, go to all those sites. You have an email to try. You have a password to try. Now, I know lots of us pretty good due diligence with passwords, making sure that your email account password is not the same as your Chase or your PayPal or even your Amazon or something like that, right? But it's not perfect. There is definitely overlap with the common population, and that's what they're hoping for, is the overlap. They have an email to try, they have a password to try. Let's go ahead and try all the accounts you have listed in your email. They will likely compromise some of those accounts. So it's definitely important to make sure your email account is not compromised. And in some very cases, they actually found that by compromising their Gmail or their Yahoo, they would find out if they have PayPal, if they have Wells Fargo or Chase, and then would be able to log into those sites too because it was the same username and password. So that's just more risk there. The ratio, in fact, of as far as tech to financial, we found in 2015 was 2.6 tech company phishing for every one financial phishing we found. Now it's greatly increased. Now it's every 7.2 tech company phishing emails we find one financial. So it is definitely growing. They're targeting more and more and more for email hubs. And so interesting stuff we've also found out is about Android app reputations. We found that in 2016, over 4 times as many new and updated mobile apps were observed and analyzed in 2015. So starting in February 2016, every month app volume was more than double the 2015 averages, okay? And so you can see here when you're looking, you're probably wondering, what happened in March? What goes on there? What was that spike going on? So in March of last year, there was a huge spike of SMS malware and SMS phishing in China. So you guys don't know, they actually don't have Google Play. China, for some reason, they don't have a good relationship with Google. They don't even allow Google. They got their own Google, right? So that means as far as Android phones, which they have plenty of, they have to rely on third-party sites to get all of their apps, right? And this is like a breeding ground for people to submit just any app they want. So they'll submit like Angry Birds or Super Mario, where, yes, you still get the game Angry Birds or the game Super Mario, but in the background they've included like a Trojan or some SMS malware that'll send out, premium SMS messages to a number silently that you don't even know about, siphoning off money, and that's essentially how that works. And that's what happened there in March. But either way, what we found, though, is that nearly 50% of new and updated mobile apps analyzed in 2016 were classified as malicious or suspicious. And that's nearly 10 million apps, okay, in 1 year. Just to give you a contrast here to 2015, only 2 million apps. So that's literally a 500% growth just in mobile apps determined malicious, okay? And so, yes, Bitcoin's in the underground ecosystem. So the FBI estimated that cyber criminals would collect over $1 billion in ransom in 2016. Now, it's actually way more than that. That was just what people actually reported to the FBI, right? There were plenty of scenarios where these small, medium businesses were hit, and, they only wanted $500, $600. They're just like, all right, this is impacting our business. Just pay the money. Let's get over it, get our files back, and be done with it. Sweep it under the rug and just forget about it, right? Plenty of people have that conversation. They never reported it to anyone, right? So it's likely way more than that. But Locky was the most successful ransomware in 2016, okay? And its debut week in February, it was infected over 400,000 victims. And since then, essentially, it's been infecting 90,000 people a day until about, I'd say, Christmas time last year. Then they went offline. They're back again, just so you guys know. They haven't shut down. They are still active and working. Not to the height they were last year, but up until about Christmas time, they were infecting almost 100,000 people a day, which is insane. And their payout rate, as far as how many people paid out, wasn't even 3%, right? Wasn't even 3%, but they were still making $1 million a day at that less than 3% payout rate, okay? But you have to realize, it's not just one guy or a group of guys that are basically making Locky work, right? It's an entire community of specialists. So while the people who actually code the payload for Locky or the payload for server may just be one guy or a group of guys, they use an entire community of specialists to get the infection and infect other people. It's all about attack vectors. Maximize as many ways possible as you can infect a PC, right? So as far as like attack vectors, you've got phishing from an email attachment. You've got phishing, macro infection from a Word document. You've got drive-by attacks through exploit kits where you just click on a booby-trapped advertisement and, oh, look, you're redirected to a malware landing page and malicious code attacks the system. There's so many different attack vectors that can attack your system. Like server is remote desktop protocol where literally a user doesn't have to do anything. They're literally just brute force attempting to log into your computer through RDP using port 3389 because that's default, and then they're just guessing usernames and passwords. An example, some company had their label machine that was hit with ransomware, and it was responsible for printing labels to ship out their products. And it was hit with ransomware, they couldn't print any labels. Well, what was the problem is that the username for this PC was warehouse, and the password was warehouse. And you'd be surprised how common that is, where people just leave simple stuff. They're like, well, I'm not going to use it. I'll just remote into it. That's the only time. That way nobody's using it. Nobody's browsing anything out of it. You're still susceptible, even if there's no user on it, to attacks because of people scanning Telnet to try and brute force an RDP into your system. So, but anyway, sorry, digressing there. Exploit kit authors, so those guys who make Locky possible to install on a system, they are completely separate from Locky. Their job, exploit kit authors like those booby trap advertisements I was talking about, they work solely on finding insecure websites that they can exploit to host malware for. They don't actually host any malware on it. They just get it ready. And then they sort of like create a listing for it on the dark net, on like Alphabay or whatever, like the eBay of the dark net where you can buy anything illegal. And essentially they say, this is ready to host malware. I'm going to go ahead and sell it to you guys. And then once you host malware, you've essentially found another attack vector. And these guys make like $3 million a month. And technically, they've never infected anybody. They've never dealt with anybody or collected ransoms or done any of that. They've got their money purely from payload authors. And so you can see how everybody sort of just works together and are able to infect people. And Locky even has like an affiliate system where they have an ID when somebody pays a Locky ransom. They have an ID attached to their payment that will let them know, okay, who infected them. Was it an email attachment campaign? Was it a macro infection from a Word document? Was it an exploit kit? Stuff like that. So they know who is due the share because who was responsible in helping them infect that customer or that victim, right? And there's a mutual benefit because exploit kit authors, they don't have to worry about, creating malware or making sure there's no bugs in cryptography implementation. They don't have to worry about hosting command and control server hosting, stuff like that. And so another important trend is the frequent changes in exploit kit uses for ransomware. So for example, the first of 2016, exploit kit ransomware was distributed using Angler and Neutrino. And we saw a huge drop eventually when somebody was sniffing too close, maybe shut them down. But nothing was going to be shut down. It didn't take long before Neutrino to move up, which worked very similar, and then all of a sudden they got all that market share. And once they had market share because Angler was shut down, they started doubling their price to use their exploit kit authors. So it's just like an underground market, if you will, right? All right, and then so what we also found ransomware as a service, right? Ransomware as a service came out in 2015. And it wasn't until 2016 that it really had its carved out its niche, right? So ransomware as a service, in case you guys don't know, it literally enables cyber criminals who don't have any knowledge or resources to create their own ransomware, and they can just easily generate customized attacks to meet their needs. So literally, this would just be like a website, like a web portal in the darknet. And we're talking easy as cake. Anybody can do it listening on this call, this webinar, where you could just go to this website, you enter in how much you want to charge, how long you want it to be for a late payment, enter in a Bitcoin wallet address where you want your payments to go to, right? And you have a whole bunch of little options and checkmark boxes like, use low CPU so it doesn't it's not suspicious while it's running, lock the computer after it's done, if you want a pop-up to show up, little small things like that, right? And essentially, once you generate this binary, it's ready to go. You distribute it however you want, and anybody you infect that wants to pay the ransom, they would get 70%. So you're wondering, why would somebody create that portal? Well, they get a cut. They usually get about a quarter to a third of the ransoms that work. And so that's the sort of mutual benefit is you can have people who maybe aren't that skilled, just script kiddies who are running phishing campaigns just trying to drain PayPal accounts, right? They don't really have any good coding knowledge. They don't know how to make encrypting ransomware. Now they can. Now they can upgrade their schemes and, increase it to actually include ransomware. And that's what's scary is we've got basically people with varying skills and degrees of knowledge that are able to still deploy ransomware. And so that's why it's only going to grow. And as far as Bitcoins, people are always wondering, if Bitcoin's still growing, right? And currently it's anonymous. That's why it's the favorite currency. When you pay for it, there's no way to really track who paid what, like X to Y. You can't find that out. Now, there are people claiming that eventually it will be busted, and that may very well be true in the future. They may decrypt or find an algorithm on how to figure that out, right? But there's already plenty of other cryptocurrencies on the market that are just waiting for that to happen, and everybody will just jump ship to them. The one I think that will happen, or people will jump to when they do crack Bitcoin, would be Monero. If you guys haven't heard of that, that uses ring signatures and will essentially give a positive rate for 12 different people that had different transactions, so that there's really no way for you to find out who sent what where. And so now we're going to move on to 2017 predictions. And so here's another nice little slide for Locky. Like I said, you guys will definitely all get a copy of this slide deck if you want. You also, I believe, will get a copy of the recording as well. But this is interesting how much Locky was able to produce. Now Bitcoin is worth way more now. It's just over 1,000 is what it's worth. It's a very volatile market, but it's probably only going to increase. But at its peak, when they were charging one Bitcoin, it was only $650. Now they only charge half a Bitcoin. But they are able to make, seriously, guys, almost $400 a year, which is just huge on how much money they're able to make. And in fact, in case you guys didn't know, the original creator of CryptoLocker, Yevgeny Bogachev, he created the Zeus botnet. He actually has currently the current largest outstanding FBI wanted value, as far as reward, it's $5 million. That's the largest amount FBI has ever offered for anybody. The bounty is still active. But this guy would put on Twitter and stuff, because that's where the hackers post all their stuff. He bought a diamond necklace for his serval cat. This cat looks like a miniature cheetah. But that's what they spend their money on. Anyway, definitely patch your systems, please. This is just a sort of informatory thing for you guys. You can see here you've got Amazon, you've got Verizon, Comcast. All of these guys have thousands and thousands of systems that are still vulnerable to Heartbleed. Heartbleed was, I think, 2.5 years ago or something like that. You just need to use your, common counterparts that are secure. That's definitely what we're going after, and we want people to watch out for, and just make sure they're utilizing. Patch your systems is definitely what we want people to do. I'm just putting it out there. Also, hacks for cars. I really do anticipate that security vendors currently for computers will be creating security software for cars in the future, maybe 10, 15 years in the future. But it's what we're going to have to do. In case you guys don't know, this is legitimate. This is actually what can happen, is happening to people. Essentially, I think the slides got mixed up here. How it works is they tested this too, proof of concept initially. Those key fobs, push to start cars, where the key fob, it's proximity based. They sense how close the key is. Is it close enough to where unlock the car? The key fobs inside the car will let you push and start the car, right? So what they did is they basically just took a router, and you can change the settings in the router to where it's a signal repeater, right? So you take the key fob and the now signal repeater, and you move it all the way hundreds of feet across the warehouse. And then you take another signal repeater that will repeat that signal hundreds of feet away, and the car thinks it's the key fob. It'll let you get right in, start it up, and drive right off. And like I said, it's beyond proof of concept, actually seeing people doing it. So this is in Europe. He's not even inside the house. He got an industrial strength signal repeater. You just put some high gain antennas on that bad boy. He's outside somebody's house, holding outside the brick wall. I guess there's a window there is what it looks like. And he's just, I'm guessing the key fob's inside that house, maybe hanging up on a hook or on a dining room table or something. And he's able to repeat the signal from there, and his buddy's able to open the car and drive it off. So right now it's just repeating the signal. It's not storing it. So once they drive away, they do lose that signal. However, I'm sure many of us have experimented with our push-to-start cars, that the car will still remain running even without the key fob in the car once you've started it with the signal, right? So right now it can only be driven once until it runs out of gas, right? So right now it's just driving to an undisclosed location where they can just part out the car. But who knows? In the future, I fully anticipate, these guys coming up with something new to where maybe they can retain that signal to where they can essentially just replicate your key fob and then have complete access to the car, start and stop as many times as they want. So it's definitely something to watch out for. And also beyond that, while this was a joke, technically, as far as the Twitter post, that my Nest was hacked and it wants, a Bitcoiner was going to lock it to 99 degrees, proof of concept has shown it's very possible, absolutely. So this Linux-based operating system, essentially, what they found was that we don't know the brand. They didn't disclose it when they disclosed the Black Hat. But essentially, it was a Linux-based operating system, and you have to pick screensavers or backgrounds for your smart thermostat. And so they hid malware as pretending to be a screensaver. And so you just pick a screensaver that was booby-trapped, boom, it locks you out, and literally it will work. If you pay the Bitcoin, it will give you your thermostat back. So currently proof of concept, nothing in the wild, but it's just stuff you got to watch out for. I mean, IoT is snowballing here. It's blooming. Here, even the vulnerability of toys in IoT. Holy smokes, this is definitely something to watch out for. So the cloud pets, I'm sure you guys maybe heard about this. If you didn't, essentially these are these pets, right, where you can connect them to your phone with your Bluetooth. You can go to a website and essentially it's like an app on your phone where you can send messages or speak into your phone, and then it'll speak from the pet. It was like advertised for, maybe military people who were deployed or people who were taking business trips all the time. It was a way to, talk to your kids through their little fluffy plush pets, right? Cool idea, sold pretty well. Problem is the management of the data. They had it on a MongoDB installation, which is essentially free database hosting installation. They did not password protect it, which is just bizarre. I don't know why you wouldn't do that. So essentially anybody connecting to this MongoDB installation and these ports didn't need a username or password, had full access to 2 million confidential messages that parents have been leaving for their children, and essentially stole the data. They took the data, copied it from it, deleted it from the actual MongoDB installation, and then just left a ransom note saying if you want these messages back, go ahead and pay the ransom. And when we take a look there, there's a website called Shodan, which will sort of tell you can search for MongoDB installations for a ransom note, and you can see there's 10,000 current servers on MongoDB installations that have been essentially just ransomed. The data taken and the ransom note left. And it's not just the cloud pets either. There was Hello Barbie, a Barbie one that was easily hackable that showed usernames, IP addresses, even the Wi-Fi connection settings like in passwords and stuff like that. Plain text, viewable, like it's just bad coding. Germany had a My Friend Kayla that was actually classified once they banned it as an espionage device and holds a 25,000 euro fine if you even sell it anymore. But it's just stuff we definitely got to watch out for. I mean, just bad practice, and it's infiltrating basically everywhere. And it is definitely the future, and we need to watch that. I mean, it's going to be, legislation at some point. We're going to have elected officials creating regulation because it needs to be there. Okay, so some of the conclusions for my presentation are that approximately 1/3 of URLs were high risk, and we found that phishing attack life cycles are dropping to 15 hours or less, and unique zero-day phishing URLs nearly doubled. In fact, we found that comparing Q1 and Q4 of 2016, Q4 was more than double what Q1 was. And new and updated malicious Android apps increased 500%. And so, I appreciate everybody joining. We're now going to enter the Q&A session. My email here is posted.
Hey, thanks.
And we have Sure, go for it. Sorry.
I didn't mean to jump over your conclusion. I thought you were done. My bad. Hey, we do have some questions. I took a couple notes as we went along, too. I just want to ask you these real quick. Going back to the ransomware. So you had said that the tech industry is at higher risk than the financial industry, if I remember that correctly. What other verticals are at the higher risk? I come from a healthcare background. I know that healthcare is a very at-risk vertical. What other ones are opportunities for the MSPs to look into?
Sorry, repeat that question one more time.
So basically, which verticals are at most risk for these kinds of attacks? I know healthcare is particularly vulnerable, and finance because of all the money involved in it. But what other verticals should people be looking at as opportunities to help out?
Well, I mean, honestly, everybody with a user clicking. I mean, I don't know what that you gotta definitely watch out. I mean, there are so many different attack vectors, right, that are posing a risk. I would say the most common as far as what we're seeing is I hate to say it's still phishing. I mean, it's so widely known, but it's seeing growth year over year. It's never shown any slowdown. It's still the most effective method of compromise, and it really does end at the users, to be honest. But a lot of these.
Yep, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to ask you. So, what is the most? Why is it still succeeding? I mean, I know educate, but people should be, educating their users
Honestly,
to avoid this kind of stuff.
Social engineering, right? I have other webinars that I can, post where I actually show a lot of these attack vectors. I actually show what a user's view would be like as far as different types, right? So probably one of the most common right now is the macro infection where, because originally a lot of people were being compromised through attachments where there was an executable file in the attachment, and it became, well, don't run or look at any executables and attachments. So what they did is they then changed and made sure that the attachment included was just a Word document, right? And so then you would think, hey, that's just a harmless Word document. And technically, the Word document is harmless until you open it up. And then usually it has this whatever message they want to put on there. All it does is tell you enable content. Once you enable the content for a macro, you are essentially allowing the Microsoft Suite or Office Suite process to, in the background, resolve a malicious URL that will then download a malicious payload, and that will be what attacks the system. And it's all because you clicked one button, which was enable content. Now, of course, if your security solution is good, you'll have many different chances here to protect you. Once when you enable content, it tries to resolve a malicious URL. We should block it right there. If that fails and the URL resolves and tries to download the payload, then it should be blocked once the payload's written to disk. And then beyond that, if that fails, once it tries to execute, you should be stopping the payload on actions that it tries to commit. So there's definitely plenty of chances here, but like I said, that's probably the most effective method of compromises too. A lot of these emails too, when they're first sent, the actual email body has a lot of work put into it, like where they basically tell people you missed a package by USPS, click here to review the tracking, or take a look at this document because you're being sued. Here's the subpoena attachment, stuff like that. They really just want to invoke sort of a click happiness from you.
Gotcha. One other question regarding ransomware specifically. So, what is you'd mentioned the FBI's involvement. Are they suggesting paying or not paying for the ransomware?
Honestly, the FBI did say that if you have no adequate backup policies in place, you are hit with ransomware and you do want your files back, they do recommend paying the ransom because it is your only recourse to get your files back. Right? Now, you do have to weigh in your hands, do you want to hand off money to cyber terrorists? But in most cases, in fact, I would say upwards of 95% of the time, you will get your files back as soon as you pay the ransom, they'll give it back. However, there are horror stories. Yes, you have heard horror stories where you pay the ransom, they don't give you anything back. Or what happens is maybe it all depends, too, how much information you give them. Like some of these people are like, oh, my God, you guys, I really need my files back. Please, I'll give you the money. Here you go. Well, if you sound super desperate, they're going to take a look into those files, take a look, see what they compromised, right? And if they can tell that it's absolutely critical or crucial, plenty of times I've heard where they go, so we don't want $1,000, we want $5,000 now, or we want $10,000, where they sort of hit you up again. And at that point, you're like, well, how much trust is there? If I pay the second time round, are you actually going to give me my files back? So you definitely want to avoid that. But for the most part, like I said, 95%. You will get your files back. So while I don't recommend advocating, if you really need those files back to the point where you're happy to hand over, $500-600, then that is your only option.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's move on to some of the questions from the listeners. The first one here being, can you talk about the importance of a multi-layered approach?
Right, exactly. So I think I covered a little bit of that as far as the macro infection. You need to have a multi-layered approach because no one layer is going to be 100% effective, right? And anybody who offers or says they're 100% effective on whatever threat, you got to run the other way because it's not possible. It's a constant cat and mouse game. They're constantly innovating and changing things. And yes, we keep up with them as best as we can, and we have great efficacy, but no one's 100%. So you want to have layers to increase redundancy, right? So let's say first layer, URL IP reputation, right? You have to resolve an address in order to download a malicious file, right? So that address is malicious. Well, we will try and block it there at our bright cloud layer. Let's say that fails, right? We hadn't seen it or we let it go through, and we resolved the URL, so that failed, and it has to download the payload. So once the payload is then actually fully downloaded, it's written to disk. At that point when it's written to disk, we would then analyze the cryptographic hash. Think of that as like a fingerprint, if you will, for each unique file. And we analyze that with the billions of hashes we have in our database to see if we've seen it before or maybe anything like it. And then from there, this is all before execution, by the way. It's only once it's written to disk. We're talking in milliseconds. We're able to communicate to our database and then block the file before it's able to execute, right? That's another layer. It's called the file determination layer. And then beyond that, we have heuristics, another layer. So let's say the URL layer fails, the file determination layer fails. We say we've never seen it before, we'll let it run. So once it runs, then you have all these actions it's committing, and a lot of ransomware have pretty stereotype actions they're going to try and do. We can block it with heuristics, meaning known actions we've seen before that we know are bad, and we're going to go ahead and flag it as bad, and then quarantine from there. And then beyond that, we have another layer called journaling and rollback. Now, it's not something we recommend everybody rely on. It's not a replacement for backup solution or anything, but essentially what it does is any unknown file that makes changes to your computer as far as like encrypting files, deleting files, changing or modifying or creating registry entries, all that stuff, it's all recorded from actual Webroot, including files. They'll actually be snapshotted. So any of your files that would have been deleted or modified, like the encryption side, we'll snapshot them, right? So let's say an hour or 2 hours later we determine that file is bad. Once it's quarantined, we'll reverse all actions as recorded by the journaling. Now, some caveats there. It doesn't work on shared network drives. It only works on the OS drive it's installed onto. There's also, a file size limitation. It doesn't work on those big Blu-ray rips of your Disney movies you've got. It's designed for Office documents and Windows files, right? But it works pretty well most of the time, and it's like I said, it's sort of a last-ditch Hail Mary effort, because usually those first three layers are going to be what protects you, because they're 99.9% effective each layer. You add those down and you really sort of reduce down to very small numbers. Like I think in total we have like 30 million customers. We only ever hear about 9 encrypting ransomware cases a week. A week we hear about 9. And so that's what we hear as far as what defeats us, and we have to go through and find out. So that's really not that many. And, like I said, we challenge you to give us a try. Give us a trial. We're non-incumbent. You can run us on alongside any other AV you have currently just to see how we're doing. But that would be my recommendations for running a layered approach.
Great. Thanks for that. You talked about ransomware. We've been on that a little bit. There's another question coming in asking about best practices to avoid as much ransomware as possible. Other than what you already covered there earlier, are there any other best practices you'd suggest?
Absolutely. Remember I talked about macros a lot? Disable macros completely. Oh my God, the trust center of Microsoft Office, you can go through and disable macros and don't even show them. Because right now, by default, the default for Microsoft Office is it won't automatically enable macros, but it will show you the enable content button, which is, they know that, and that's why they tell you to enable content. But you can have it to where it blanket does not show any macro or enable content button, and that's what I recommend. I know some people have legitimate uses for macros, but you can usually do that through another workaround, and I highly recommend that, because if you just blanket disable macros, you're probably reducing the surface area attack exposure by about 20% of all ransomware. Like I said, it's not going to block all ransomware, but even if you're reducing 20% just from doing one little thing that for free, why not do it? Also, I recommend beyond that, educate your users. That's a huge one. I'm talking beyond just the standard once a year, pick the obvious answer slideshow that everybody does and gets the certification. There are actually really, really good sites out there. Sonic Wall by Dell, they have a nice sort of phishing test, if you will, where what they'll do is they'll show you side by side 2 different emails. One's a phishing, one's not, and they want you to pick the difference. That's pretty cool. There are also sites out there, if you just Google phishing tests, where you can sign up your own employees by email for fake phishing emails. Now, none of these are malicious. They're not going to harm your system. They're just to test to see who of your employees would actually fall for it, right? And they're blatant phishing, so if any of your employees are falling for it, you can sort of follow up with them and tell them, why would you do this? There's no reason to. And stuff like that. That would be what I recommend.
Great. We talked a little bit around cloud as well. Question here is, being cloud-based, what protection is offered offline?
Right. So exactly. Probably people ask, offline if I'm on a flight, even though airplanes now have internet. But in that scenario where you don't have internet and you're worried about protection, maybe because you're plugging in a flash drive or something, and you're like, I can't scan the cloud, I don't have it. Yes, no. So what we would do is we have a specific offline mode Webroot will go into, where essentially it turns everything that's brand new, that was never before seen, that enters the system, whether it be from USB or from some other drive that you maybe insert, it'll treat it. Technically, it'll give it an attribution of an X, which is considered unknown offline. In this unknown offline mode, what it will do is it will turn on journaling and rollback, like I mentioned, where it will monitor, it will let it run and monitor everything it does. If any heuristics trigger, like off actions of things we know that's bad, because our heuristics is actually locally in the client. Our heuristics aren't relied upon through the cloud, so you don't need to have connection to the internet in order to have heuristic layer. So that's protecting you there from malicious actions. But we also have the journaling and rollback. So if anything bad does happen, it's all recorded, and once you resume connection to the internet, it'll go ahead and immediately get a resolution on that file, and if it is bad, it'll quarantine it and then reverse all actions as recorded.
Okay, great. There's one last question here that we got before I think we're going to be running out of time. It says, you find the best elixir of sorts to provide reasonable defense at SMB investment appetites. And he says technologies like sandboxing are great, but cost prohibitive outside the enterprise. Any thoughts on that?
No, you know what? I do know somebody who would be able to answer that better. I'm not I would definitely have to talk to some of my colleagues to answer that best. The last thing I want to do is say something, maybe necessarily incorrect. But I have some people who would be able to answer that fully, so I have no problem answering that question offline. If you want to shoot me an email, my email's right there, and I'll be more than happy to get back to you.
Yeah, so to our listener, you can shoot that direct, or we will have these questions forwarded off, and somebody will get back to you at some point. So, Tyler, any concluding thoughts here before we wrap this up today?
No, once again, I really appreciate everybody joining in, and if you do have any additional questions that you think of, feel free to email me.
Yeah, same on this side. I appreciate you all taking the time to spend with us. Don't forget to submit questions if you think of them in the future here, and I hope everybody has a great rest of the day. Thanks very much for your attendance.